Welcome to Teaching Revolution at 250 and Educator Symposium at the Delaware Public Archives. We are so glad that you're here. My name is Megan Peterman and I am the Community Relations and Marketing Manager here at the Archives. I will be your MC for the day. We are so thrilled that you could take time out of the back to school hustle and other professional development things to join us for this event. Today's program is packed with ways to explore Delaware's history and bring it into your classrooms and learning environments. We'll start with some introductory remarks, then dive into Delaware's role in the Revolutionary War with Mr. Chuck Fithian, review some resources from the Delaware Historical Society and the Archives with Ms. Rebecca Fay and Mr. Joe Sullivan, and hear from a few of your colleagues, Ms. Emily Green and T.H. Leighty, about turning those resources into lesson plans. And later you'll have a chance to visit the interactive tables behind me from cultural heritage institutions across Delaware. We've got the Delaware Public Archives, the Delaware Historical Society, First State Heritage Park, Delaware 250, Delaware Division of Libraries, Delaware Military Museum, Historical and Cultural Affairs, Lewis Historical Society, the Newcastle Courthouse Museum, and Newcastle Historical Society. So thank you to all of you for coming as well. At the end of today, you'll have an option to tour the Archives' new exhibit, Revolutionary Lives, 1776 to tomorrow, if you'd like. And a quick note of thanks, breakfast today was provided by Delaware 250, and today's lunch is thanks to the Friends of the Delaware Archives. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce someone who truly embodies Delaware's commitment to preserving and sharing history, the Director and State Archivist of the Delaware Public Archives.
How are y'all doing today? Good. Good. Would you like to be in the classroom right now, teaching? Been there, done that. That's why I'm in the archives, okay? But I certainly want to thank you for what you're doing with our students and helping them along the way to understand some things about our foundation and what the history is all about. This is, in fact, your archives. And the archives is your invitation to history. We invite you to our history here. Here we have over 53 million documents, over 1 million photographs, historic maps, architectural plans, histories of not only prominent Delawareans, but a host of everyday people who have lived here. Also, we have about 3,500 books, which you can see right over there. I always say, tell the students what a book is, okay? Not a tablet. Anyway, a lot of these books are one of a kind, and we have other related ephemera that relates to the history of Delaware. Here at the Archives, we have trained archivists who are ready to help you discover materials for you to do your research and enhance student lesson plans or triage individuals and students to this vast repository of history known as the Delaware Public Archives. Today's focus is to provide you with a historical framework to build upon as Delaware prepares to mark the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. Truly the semi-quincentennial, you all know that word? Semi-quincentennial, come on, let me hear it. I'm not going to point at one of you and tell you to spell it, okay, so don't worry about that. As the first state to ratify the U.S. Constitution, this state does, in fact, rank #1. And if you haven't already visited our website and signed up to our Facebook account, I strongly suggest you do. Because one of the features there is what we call the Delaware Snapshot. And that features an historical event, place, or person researched and written by Robin Brown, who many of you might know was a feature writer for the News Journal, and I will say we are very pleased to have her as our own resident in writing. And with these Delaware snapshots, if you look at them, there's something that you can use very quickly to start conversations in your classroom. For example, as recently as yesterday, the Archives posted a daily snapshot tagged as, "Have you ever wondered how the Delaware Regiment got their uniforms. Here you would have discovered how George Craighead, the clothier general of for the Delaware State, was responsible for supplying provisions, uniforms, and anything else that the Continental Army and the Delaware Militia needed during the American Revolution. What a discussion, just on that snapshot alone, that you could have with students to talk about the clothing, to talk about what they needed to do, even to get the clothing in the first place. Who, in fact, did that? Many of those questions can be answered with materials that we have right here in the Delaware Public Archives. So please make today a takeaway day for you and use the resources of the Delaware Public Archives to enhance your teaching and enlighten your students to Delaware's rich and cultural history. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And now it's my pleasure to introduce someone who's long been a champion of preserving and promoting Delaware's rich cultural and historical heritage. Dick Carter serves as the chair of the Delaware Heritage Commission, where he works to support projects that bring Delaware history to the public. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Carter.
Thank you. I'm not here to talk about Delaware history today. I'm here to talk about school teachers. You folks are all, whether you know it or not, members of a noble profession. I graduated from a school in Sussex County, which no longer exists, Millsboro High School, in 1965. Been a few years. And I think often about the education that I received there. I'm also the grandson of a lifelong school teacher. And I think back in particular about two ladies who were my second and fourth grade teachers at Millsboro. And these ladies were gifted in conveying the importance of history, even to little old Dick Carter, 7 or 9 years old, whichever was the case. And that instruction that I received that early in my life has stood by me for all these decades since then. And I'm not sure if the two teachers, who both remain lifelong friends of mine, ever realized what a gift they had given me, but I certainly did. And I think that you folks have students in your classes who are very much like I was at that age, and who will be inspired by what you convey to them about Delaware history and about the history of our nation. And I want to welcome you all here today, and keep in mind that you are doing a noble cause in going to the classroom every day. I learned from my grandmother that nice school buildings are nice to have, and fancy equipment and all that, but the key to the whole process is you, teachers, and what you are able to convey to your students. So I wish you all the very best in the months and years going forward from now. And I thank you all for listening to me. Thank you.
All right, our first session today will be an overview of the Revolutionary War from Chuck Fithian. Chuck Fithian is a historical archaeologist who holds a master's degree in history from Salisbury University with a concentration in colonial and revolutionary America. From 1986 to 2014, Fithian served as the curator of archaeology for the Delaware Division of Historical and Cultural Affairs. He was responsible for the curation of the state of Delaware's extensive 4+ million artifact archaeological collection. I don't say that 3 times fast. From 2013 to 2021, Fithian was a lecturer in anthropology at Washington College in Chestertown, Maryland, and for 3 of those years he served as staff archaeologist with the college's Center for Environment and Society. Currently, he is working on a social history of the Delaware Regiment during the American Revolution and the documentation of Delaware's military and logistical landscape. And we are excited to have Mr. Fithian here today. And we hope you'll enjoy his presentation, Revolutionaries, Loyalists, Landscape, and the American Revolution in Delaware.
Megan, thank you. And thank you, Joe, and good morning to everyone. there's an image of the Delaware state in the 18th century. And the events of the American Revolution have influenced events throughout the state for the past 250 years. Whether Delawareans realize it or not, that event is woven through the state's history and is a major influence in many different ways. But a lot of the history behind that is unknown, or it is somewhat shrouded behind, mythology, both national and state. And you've heard a little bit about Caesar Rodney, the ride to get back to Congress from the Declaration, sign the Declaration. Maybe a little bit about Dickinson, Coach's Bridge, things like that, sort of bits and pieces. But what is actually behind a lot of it is Delaware has a remarkably complex history overall, and a remarkably complex Revolutionary War history. Delaware occupied a place in the Mid-Atlantic that's probably one of the most culturally diverse areas in colonial America. It was founded very early, is associated with the Delaware Bay, and was the scene of European colonization beginning in the 1620s. From there, developed very complex colonial society that's scattered across a very diverse landscape. For a very small state, we tend to think of not much happened, or it's kind of the same from one end to the other, but it really is not. And as you'll see today, the complexity gets rather complex and intriguing. When you have a population that's scattered across upland settings, coastal settings, they're interacting with marine environments, they're interacting with coastal environments, they establish cultural systems in government, settlement pattern, diet, that really contrast to other areas of the country and even other areas within the state. Some of them are fairly unique and different. So Delawareans set themselves on Delaware's complexity in the colonial period. So with that complexity as kind of a base, when the American Revolution rolled along, it brought its own set of complexities and changes and differences on top of one that had already existed for almost a century, depending on where you want to start Delaware's beginning date. So when the revolution rolls along, you have this population reacting to some very extraordinary sets of changes. You have some who didn't like it, some who glommed onto it, right immediately, pretty early and vigorously. Other ones who kind of sat on the fence, trying to kind of gauge where they needed to go. But what I'd like to do today is to showcase several research projects that bring this complexity out. It kind of gives you an idea of the Delaware story and its many facets and complexities and changes that took place at the time. And I think at the end of it, and then in the course of this day, you'll realize that probably what needs to be expanded as teachers, and that this relatively small state has indeed a remarkable past. We've already touched upon Rodney. Nicole Belolan, who's a historian, has done some new research on Rodney's life itself. You think, well, gee, don't we know everything about him, kind of by now he's figured so prominently? Well, the answer to that is no. There's a lot of aspects of his personal life that she's delving into, but she has expanded that narrative to include people who are associated with him on his plantation, people of color, some, many are who enslaved, and she is in the process of documenting them and their significance in not only his life, but in their role here in Kent County. So there's much more that she has uncovered on him. And in the course of, over the next year, her report will be published. So you can get a chance to take a look at that. I don't know exactly the date, but next year it should be available. But what she has done is managed to open up some new perspectives on Rodney himself. Another one, to come back to some of the points of some familiarity, is the Battle of Coach's Bridge. Everybody's heard of that. The first time that the American flag was fired upon by an enemy force. Well, maybe not quite so. Or it has been disposed of. It was a minor action that really had no consequence. The British sort of swatted this little net and kind of went on and did whatever they wanted to do. And the work of Wade Katz has found that's not a really good perspective on this either. That this was a much harder fight. The Americans put up a great deal of resistance in an effort to stop the British advance from the head of Elk on their way up across northern Delaware. And what has been thought of as a relatively minor skirmish is now really the status of a battle. The Americans had a running fight from roughly about here where Aiken's Tavern is, all the way back across the landscape, and produced a series of delaying actions. Their instruction, the American commander was a man by the name of Maxwell, whose names that you see here. His instructions was to be an annoyance. And that's classic Washington understatement. And he did a very good job of that, of creating a series of delaying actions, inflicting casualties, and damage on the British forces as they moved across. And probably the most telling thing, the severity of it, is the British sat for 5 days, sort of licking their wounds, taking care of the wounded, taking care of the battlefield, and things like that. If this was so insignificant, why did the best army in the world stop for 5 days to kind of regroup itself and get itself back together? The other thing that's emerged is the nature of the forces involved. And this is why most likely colors were not being used, is that this is a light infantry fight. And you see a British light infantry here who represents a British light company that's scaled down for American campaigning. The American forces were the same. Light infantry units don't carry flags. So the chances of the American flag being under fire for the first time is probably unlikely when you consider the nature of the battle and the forces involved. So he's doing more work on that, and there will be more outcoming over the next year or so in the lead up to the anniversary of Cooch's Bridge in 2027. Now, types of American soldiers that Delaware produced. It produced men who served in each one of these categories. You have militia, which is based on the existing militia system dating back into the colonial period, state units, and you have Continental Army units. And Delawareans are woven in and out of every one of these. They raised some of themselves. They participated in other ones that were raised by the Congress themselves, notably the Continental Army. And for purposes of the day, I want to focus on one that was in the Continental Army. That was Delaware's regiment. To do that, you may ask, how do you reconstruct this? And this applies to civilians too. This type of research, and to throw a little bit of professional jargon out at you, is prosopography, which is the deep biography of a group of people, or groups of people. To do that requires an interdisciplinary approach, like you see here, of various kinds of historical sources, archaeological sources when they're available, physical anthropology when it's available, material culture studies. So all of that has to be put together in an effort to understand how complex and involved and what the nature of a particular group of people is. Now, in this context, it's a military group, but like I said, if you're looking at farmers, if you're looking at people of color, if you're looking at mariners, whatever group you may be interested in, that type of research is required to fully understand who they might have been and what their lives were like. Our job as researchers is to understand it in all of its complexity and include everyone in the narrative who have a role in it. I'll give you an example of a military record here in the archives. Our company returns that give us snapshots of what's going on in a particular unit at a particular time. It lists the men's names, what's happening, who are present. If you'll notice here, a lot of these men are doing something else. So the strength of a unit is sometimes watered down because they're off somewhere else in other assigned duties. So that's a company return for John Patton's unit, which became the regiment's light infantry company. We can talk about that on the side. Here's a regimental return that looks at the regiment writ large. All 8 companies that made up the unit are recorded here. It gives you their strengths. It gives you who the officers are and what's happening to them. Again, there's notations of men elsewhere, and then comments down here as to what needs to be done. And you can't see it too well, but this one says, musicians need practice. The reason why that's so important is musicians played a very fundamental role in military organizations at the time. Today, military music is kind of ornamental and ceremonial, but in the 18th century, military drummers regulated the daily life of a regiment. So they had to know duty calls, they had to know pieces of music that signified certain things. This is an illustration, one of the rarest of illustrations that just emerged in 2018. This is a sketch by L'Enfant of the American Army and its major cannon in the Hudson Highlands in 1782. Situated back here is an American redoubt, fortifications, the hut lines, and just off the picture is Washington's tended, but it shows a group of soldiers here, which is, as I said, one of the rarest illustrations of an American soldier of this time period. Here's a group of men, probably with a sergeant. Here's a man with an officer, also probably a non-com, who's taking his orders. And come back to Delaware. Delaware raised one regiment during the course of its service. In late 1775 and the early part of 1776, Congress authorized what became known as the 88th Battalion Resolve. They wanted to professionalize and increase the Continental Army that was then around the outskirts of the city of Boston. And each state was required to provide a quota, and it's based on population. Some units like Maryland had to raise 8 regiments. Some had to raise 4 or 5. Delaware was required to raise only 1 because of the dispersed nature of its population that we were just talking about. But as you can see, this regiment retained or acquired a reputation for discipline. It acquired a reputation for prowess on the battlefield. And as Henry Lee says, it furnished what no regiment in the Army that surpassed it. That's quite a thing to say from a prominent military commander. And also there are many British writers that say the same thing. If you're familiar with British writing, they don't hand out accolades about courage gratuitously. So if they're saying that, something like this, they mean it. And it also meant that these guys gave them a hard time, while they were at it. So the regiment history is relatively complex. It's not that it was raised and authorized on 9 December 1775, stayed the same throughout the course of the war, and when it mustered out in January 1783, it was the same thing. That's not the case. The regiment changed as the course of the war. It changed as a result of the needs for the Army, of things that Congress saw. It also required shifting due to battle casualties, and a pronounced change that occurred on 16 August 1780, where the Maryland and Delaware Division was shattered at the Battle of Camden. The eight companies that made up the regiment then formed 2 companies. The 8 regiments that made up the Marylanders formed 8 companies. So that's how disastrous this battle was. But they came out of it throughout the Southern Campaign. The Delawares created a reputation that, again, as Lee said, was unsurpassed. And it was all geared to this. Yeah, the Continental Army is the first professional military fighting force raised by the United States. And the Delawares and their brothers in Maryland acquired a reputation that I think is arguably, you can say they were the best in the Continental Army. It was highly trained, it was highly disciplined. Washington called on them time and time again to help defend the Army as it was withdrawing, or to be an aggressive forward force. As you can see here, this is a depiction of the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, of which the Marylanders and Delawares were prominent in the third line. They became the absolute practitioners of linear warfare, of acquiring the discipline it took to maintain battle lines like that, to provide sustained fire, and to be able to withstand the shock of a bayonet charge or the use of a bayonet itself. The bayonet was really the queen of military tactics at the time. The firing of muskets was just sort of a preliminary. You could get down to the real business of forcing your adversary from the field with the application of cold steel. We are able to get profiles of these soldiers by looking at their enlistment records. And the system that was used to create the Delaware Regiment was very much based on the British precedent. And from each of these records, we can get an idea of a man's name, how old he was, his height, a weight, sometimes, a hair color, complexion, where he was born, where he was living, his occupation. And all of these help us develop that profile that we want to know. It's like, we want to know about this man. So the regiment seeks to understand who was involved. The battle records is fairly well known. Archaeology has added to it, but what we don't know is who was in this regiment. How did that change? Are there voices that we've not heard from in the past? There's been a tendency to present the Delaware Regiment in a specific way by various different historical writers. Has it included everybody? Is everybody in there? Our premise here is that accurate history is an inclusive one. So we want to make sure that we're covering everybody. So we're developing those profiles. How does it fit within the Continental Army as a whole? What happened to them? Many of these men spent 8 years in military service. What did they get for it? it adds a fuller experience of what Delaware's Revolutionary War experience was, and then can give us any insights into 18th century, late 18th century Delaware. Why was this regiment the way it was, and what are the cultural systems that helped produce it? Modern, anthropologists look at warfare as a cultural thing, not something that sort of hovers around and kind of lands on a group of people. How people wage war, why they wage war, who wages war, are all very much culturally influenced and are parts of cultural patterns that they create. So by looking at these things gives us the clues. And now we're dealing with each of those kinds of records that you saw a little bit earlier. So what are we seeing? Their ages vary. Generally in the mid-20s, a little bit older than what we expected. We expected it to kind of sort of be in the late teens, early 20s. The patterns that we're seeing for the Delawares is that sort of like mid-20s to slightly a little bit later. Not a huge difference, but one we should pay attention to. Men from Delaware consistently form the majority of the men in the unit. A lot of units are drawing men from other areas, and we know that other states recruited in Delaware. When we look at the roles, it seems that Delaware men form the major basis for the recruiting. Foreign-born men are present, but that declines over time. And men who define themselves as American become more common as the war progressed. Some social mobility is suggested. Men who start out as non-commissioned officers, a sergeant, attain commission rank, which is really kind of interesting considering the social influences and social implications of what it meant to be an officer in the Continental Army. The ages and social background are relatively consistent. Men of color are present. We'll come back to that in a little bit. How they differ? Some in areas that are very similar to what we see in other state lines. Other studies of men from New Jersey, New Hampshire, Virginia a little bit, things like that. There's some similarity, but there's also some distinct differences, like the stage that we were talking about, the social mobility. One of the things that we are not seeing is the Delawares don't conform to a notion that's in American scholarship that as the war progressed, the Continental Army was increasingly made up of men who were disposable. Sort of by that, what I mean is that they occupied rungs of colonial or 18th century society that if something were to happen to them, not a problem. They didn't own land, they didn't have influence, things like that. We're not seeing that, which is really an important major difference, particularly when you look at the men of a certain age, men of a certain background, the Delaware men are formed the basis of the men in this regiment across its history. So how did they sustain that? How does one group keep doing that for nearly 8 years? And how are they successful in doing that? So there's a lot of things going on in it. There's some similarities with other units, but there are some distinct differences that are emerging as well. We have now identified at least 15 men of color. Cato Fagan was one that we kind of knew he was there, but he had been the only one that anybody ever talked about. So when we started this project, kind of like, see it, what's the likelihood there's just one man of color in the regiment? And as we started to dig, we began to find others. And there's a lot of things that complicate this sort of research. To many respects, the Continental Army was colorblind. So it did not record race necessarily. If you were a man, a capable man of a certain age, okay. There was nothing was going to stop you from the listing. So the fact that there is not, it's interesting and a very great find for us, but we weren't expecting them to not be there, I guess is what I'm saying. So of the 15 men, here's a group of the ones that we do know something about. Edward Harmon has left probably one of the best records because he was a veteran and received a pension in the 1830s as a part of the federal pension process. And he leaves a little bit of a comment, about what he did and how he saw himself. James Songo served in 2 units. He started out in one Continental unit, was discharged, re-enlisted in the Delaware Regiment. Many of these men's names are tied to African American families that we see throughout the history of the Delmarva Peninsula. They began in the 17th century in Virginia, worked their way to Maryland, if you stay in Maryland, or expand in the Delaware. And these men can be linked, back to those families. Some of the problems is if they have anglicized names, it's hard to see them because sometimes whites share those names as well, so you have to work really hard to kind of piece them out. Yes, sir?
Yes, were these free African Americans?
Yes.
Okay, it's my understanding that some enslaved Africans were offered to take part in the fight, and there were promises of their freedom later.
Right.
But I know that so only about 5,000, 9,000 Africans fought with the colonies, and British were offering freedom to the enslaved people. So for about 20 or 30,000 enslaved people left the plantations going to British.
Those numbers can change, but you're right. Both sides receive men of color to participate in these units, and to many African Americans, freedom wore a red coat. So they made that calculation. To others, it didn't, and it really depends. There are some men who are enslaved in the Continental Army who are recruited, or not recruited, they're provided as a substitute for someone else. So those men are there. And you'll see an occasional reference, like George LaHaya, for example, was discharged, and he was referred to as a slave for life. And we're really scratching our heads because none of the other military records pertaining to him ever mentioned a thing about that. So we're trying to figure out what's going on there. And that kind of comes back to the complexity of trying to figure out if men of African American descent or Native American descent, they're here as well. How can we recognize them fully? And right now, the 15 I think is conservative. I got another half a dozen or so. So I'm trying to kind of look through the records. Can we really be sure that's who they are? So if you have more of that, maybe we can talk a little bit later.
Yeah, I'd love to learn more about this.
But what the other part of it that I want to make you guys aware of, and the words here is at different times that that you see across here. They are present in the beginning when the regiment begins its service. They're there at the end. So it's not like African American guys or Native American guys show up because whites no longer want to be a soldier. That does not seem to be the case. They're not we don't think they're present in huge numbers like Rhode Island or Connecticut, but they are here. This is part of the story. And that is one of the things that when we started this, we want to make sure we captured it. We want to make sure that these men's experiences are represented in the research that we're doing. Another side that's equally hard to see are women in the regiment. For the longest time, I couldn't find them. There's no references to them. All of the company returns show up. Not a single woman is mentioned. But we know the Army allowed it. The Continental Army allowed at least 2 women per company to be present. Very, very similar to what's going on in the British service. But where are they? Could the Delaware Regiment have been the oddest 18th century unit and not had women associated with it? Don't think so. Well, we finally begin to see them through the ration receipts that are here in the archives. Here's a ration receipt for Rachel Husband. Her husband was a sergeant in the regiment, and this is for June of 1781, where she is drawing rations. She can't draw those rations if she's not affiliated with the Army somehow. As the deeper we dug, the more we begin to see her, as well as at least a dozen other women that are present. We're trying to map out their experience. Some of their husbands are long service. They started in 1776 and were still in the Army in 1783. Does that mean the same for them, or was that a different set of experience? So we've got more to do, but much like men of color, women are present in the regiment. Now I want to emphasize too, they're not in the regiment concealing their identity as women and participating as soldiers. They are in the Delaware Regiment functioning within the confines of the Continental Army. And the responsibilities of laundresses, cooks, assistants, with the regiment in the field. That is the role that they are, that they are engaged in. Because of that, they were subject to the Articles of War. A woman could be flogged, if she committed an infraction of military regulations. So it's not like they're just sort of hanging out on the edges of the regiment itself. They are fully involved, but yet are subject to much the same things that their husbands in the regiment would be. Now, we also want to document their experience. What happened to these men when they came back? And that is turning out to be as complex as their military experiences. Some participated in government affairs. Several became governors. Some were in legislature. Many of them continued on in military affairs. They were active again during the War of 1812. Some formed a unit of veterans called the Veteran Volunteers. Many joined the Society of Cincinnati, but classic to Delawareans' resistance to things they don't like. Some formed the Patriotic Society, which was open to all men who were veterans of the Revolution, whereas the Society of Cincinnati was just the officers. Many emigrated westward as a part of the country's expansion. Some seemed to do well, other ones not so. And others just disappear. We have no record of what happens to them once they come home. They just vanish. And then many participated in the federal pension process, which luckily for us, that's how they describe their experience. Now, moving away from strictly the military, there's also a logistical side, a logistical and infrastructure framework that Delawareans created. It's stunningly complex in terms of how they were able to manufacture things, grow crops, produce grains, produce corn and stuff for the support of the Army. And many of those records survive here in the archives, and they're a tremendous record of Delawareans' experience, sort of not necessarily in the Army, but one related to the revolutionary cause and their interest and ability to support the revolutionary cause. This is one of the ledgers kept by Isaac Carty, who was one of the receivers of supplies. The system was relatively complex and involved, and there were various men who were part of the process station in each of the counties, and it was their charge to manage the receipt of supplies and its issuance and distribution ultimately to the Army. And Isaac Carty was a man who lived up by Duck Creek, which is, Duck Creek Crossroads is now modern day Smyrna. So rather than, so how do we look at these things? Rather than just sort of brain-numbing lists of bushels of corn and baskets of wheat and sheaves of hay and things like that, what are we able to get out of it? And this will give you an idea what some of those records look like. This is a return of supplies that William Millen produced. He was one of the receivers for Newcastle County. So they give us an idea of what was involved in the logistical support of the Army. We tend to focus on the Army and sort of kind of inadvertently think of it as kind of existing on its own. It just sort of is there. But without understanding that there's this huge sort of bottom of the pyramid that supported the Continental Army. And the American Revolutionaries created this really complicated system to accomplish that. So it gives us a chance to look at what the agricultural production was like, what human resources, who was involved, who performed these tasks, who drove the wagons to Philadelphia, who brought the corn in, who made the clothes that we'll talk about in a little bit. And this is where sort of natural history comes in, where how the cultural landscape intersects with the natural landscape. And for those of you who may teach science classes, this is the way you can bring the 250th in to environmental studies, because the environment's influence on what Delawareans did and what influences they had, say, on tactics, small boat operations, or where an army went and where it didn't, what the obstacles were, and presence of weather at the time that's influencing military movements. Some of the records seem to indicate that there's a drought going on in Delaware at this time. There's lots of discussions of, the millers can't work today because there's no water in the rivers. Or the meadows around Philadelphia are being depleted because of all the cattle and stuff that are being driven up for the support of the Army are consuming it all. So there's these glimmers of environmental history that work all through these kinds of records. This is an example of a man being paid for driving cattle to Philadelphia. We tend to think cattle drives as, rawhide cowboys and all that kind of stuff. It was happening here in Delaware, and it started as early as the 1690s, where Delawareans were supplying sort of some of the food for the emerging city of Philadelphia. So this process sort of developed along the lines of something that had already been in existence for some time. Here's the expenses for providing men who are going through inoculation. If you were a man who stepped up to enlist in the Continental Army, the next thing that happened to you was you were inoculated for smallpox, which means it infected you somewhat. So the state had to create a kind of a smallpox ward, if you will, where these men went so they could get through that sort of initial phase of infection, develop the immunities before they were sent to the Army. Otherwise, they were just going to transfer smallpox to the Army. And so there was a building somewhere near here in Dover, I'm not quite sure where it is, an old schoolhouse, that was converted into a smallpox inoculation area. And many of the local women, like Elizabeth Battle, some of the others, took care of these sick soldiers. And then we got an idea of the various craftsmen. Here's a receipt for John Palmer, who was a cooper. Here's a black man who's assisting in stacking the public hay. So we can get a glimpse here of how African Americans and Native Americans are participating in the war effort, other than in the Army itself. And an important part of this, and Steve mentioned it earlier, is the clothier general, a man by the name of George Craighead. His papers are kind of scattered, hard to find, but about a year ago, a group of them emerged in record groups here in the archive. And it gives a really detailed accounting of how he's functioning, how his job is working. And there's the responsibilities of the clothier generals was to provide clothing for their respective units. Each of the state had a clothier general, and there was a main clothier general with the Continental Army. The Congress in Washington felt that if they did not distribute the responsibilities of this out to the states, there was no way Congress could take care of this army of 16,000 plus men. So the feeling is that they would create sub-clothier generals at each of the state levels. They would get the clothing made, and then it would be sent to the various units itself. It was overseen by the Office of Clothier General in the Continental Army itself, so there was Army oversight. And Craighead was to provide a regulation uniform. This will give you an idea of what that uniform looked like. This was set down by regulation in 1779. What the men from Delaware were to wear. And this is the kind of garments that George Craighead produced. Those records, those receipts gives us an idea of the clothing he bought, of the list of women who are making shirts and overalls. This is a pair of overalls that the soldier here is wearing. So it's giving us a record of this aspect of the logistical framework that Delaware produced in an effort to support the Army. So it gives us a good idea of what sort of another profession was, or sort of the materiality of the regiment would be. And it gives us an idea of how successful it was, and what these men would look like, at different periods of their service. Here's some men who reconstructed Delaware Continentals. This kind of approach is a great interpretive program. It kind of helps brings out, African American history, women's history. So they were all involved in this process in terms of how these uniforms got made. The uniforms also convey who these men belong to. So there's a sense of identity, by these uniforms. If you notice, in the previous slide, I had a USA button. They become the most common button as the war progresses. They're found very frequently in archaeological context. Archaeologists see in that as an emerging national identity that's manifesting itself in the way the Army is dressed. And to come up back to someone who's probably very familiar with you guys, is Dickinson and his role as president of the state of Delaware. What you may not be aware of is his responsibilities as commander-in-chief. When he came to office in late 1781, he inherited a state that was really serious, that was in serious trouble. And with that, he brought a huge military experience. You kind of think, well, how's that? This guy's a Quaker. How is this guy, who's coming out of that religious tradition? Why is he involved in the military? And he never really says, but that's really pretty. But what we can see in his writings and in his correspondence is someone who really knew their way around military matters. He doesn't seem to have been involved in the French and Indian War. His brother, likewise, is pretty savvy with military stuff as well. So wow, where is this coming from? How did he manage to do this? But throughout his life, he had seen a lot of military service by the time he becomes president. He was a colonel of Italian Philadelphia Associators that you see here, which is an extremely well-heeled unit in Philadelphia. He took his men into the field right after the Declaration of Independence was signed. You know, unlike the other signers who signed it, they went home and said, oh yeah, we did a cool thing, didn't we? And then you go home, Dickinson puts a uniform on and he's with his men in the field 2 days later. So that's a huge contrast. Then he does probably one of the biggest 18th century social inversions that you could expect. Here's a man who you consider an elite, doesn't do that. He becomes a private man in Captain Stephen Lewis's company. He serves in that capacity during the Philadelphia campaign and then does some scouting. After that, he comes out of military service, but he continues to interact with military officers of all different levels throughout the course of the war, and then when he becomes president. But as I started to say, he inherited a state that was really in some serious trouble in a lot of different ways, economic trouble, but also militarily. You know, the Delaware Bay is a major economic burden. The British knew that, and they knew that if they could do something to interfere with that and make that problem, then that would hurt the revolutionary effort. And their presence on the Delaware Bay was all throughout the war. It never really ever ceased. But what was beginning to happen was a series of raids by loyalist small boat operations and privateers. One of the things that the Americans did not know is Parliament had stopped land operations in 1782, did not stop Royal Navy operations. So now the Royal Navy is unattached to what the Army wants. They are starting to become more active in the Delaware Bay, Chesapeake Bay, along the American coast. And along with them, the loyalist privateers and these whaleboat crews that were operating and conducting a series of raids all along, up and down Delaware's coastline. These were incredibly tactically adept. These men knew what they were doing. They were being launched out of New York. And Delaware historians have tended to dispose of these things as a nuisance, largely because of their irregular nature. You know, this isn't like a big climatic shootout, someplace. You know, there are a series of raids, they disrupt the government, they disrupt the economic, they cause a lot of problems. But that had sort of the proverbial in the pond, you know, those rings of influence get bigger and bigger. So throughout the course of the war and well into Dickinson's administration, these men were conducting these planned, organized raids. Some of them could penetrate 6 miles inland. Thomas Collins's house near Smyrna was raided. Dickinson's house was raided. And these were very targeted. You know, they come ashore, they hit these revolutionary leaders' houses, and then they leave. They don't bother anybody else. So somebody's pulling this is sort of a classic man behind the curtains here. Who's doing it? Most likely, it's the Board of Associated Loyalists out of New York City. So what's Dickinson to do? One of the first things he has to contend with is he's getting correspondence from American leaders going, this is not over. Yes, Cornwallis and his army surrendered at Yorktown. Hooray for us. But it's not over. We don't think that's the end of the story. So he's got that one thing to deal with. Then he's got these loyalist raids to deal with. And what he does, he begins to upgrade the militia. He uses his experience to begin to reorganize and upgrade the militia. And he does that by literally sitting down with the Army's drill book, published in 1779, and extracts out of that what he wants his militiamen to know. And the reason why he does that is he wants to upgrade their proficiency, but he also knows they're most likely going to have to work for the Continental Army. And the Continental Army is not going to tolerate a whole bunch of guys who don't know what they're doing, who can't take their place in the line, who don't know how to drill, who don't know how to do military activities. They're not going to tolerate that. So he knows he's got to up their game and make them more proficient. So he extracts all this information out of the drill manual. He publishes them in a small book. He publishes about 500 copies. 450 are distributed to the men throughout the units that he's here. The Delaware Public Archives has 2. There's only 5 copies that I've been able to find of that 500 that survive, and 2 of them are here in the archives. And this will give you an idea what the front page looks like. Inside of it, he outlined all the basic maneuvers, the manual exercise, really minutely detailed military practice. And to give you an idea of how closely he read this, he corrected a typo that's in the original manual. So it's not like this isn't just sort of 18th century cut and paste. You know, he's sitting down, he's looked at this manual, what do I need for my men to know? And so he breaks it down into the manual exercise, the basic battalion structures, the maneuvers, the basic facings, firings, and wheelings, how to handle that musket, and then camp security. He reviews these regiments in late 1782, wants to see the effect, and it very clearly had one. Once these reforms get put into place, you see these loyalist raiders, they're not coming in with the impunity that they had before. And one of the writers says, yes, now they're out keeping their boats. You know, when the militia shows up, they know that they're not going to get away with what they were doing beforehand. And there's a group of guys that are going to test what they were after. So a very serious, very serious consequence of all that. So we look at him, he provided a successful defense of the state, prepared his men for service with the Continental Army and potentially wider campaign. But also, if you read his writing, it fits very neatly into other things that he's written during the course of his writing. You were all familiar with letters of the Pennsylvania farmer, but he also wrote the Olive Branch Petition. He also wrote the reason why Americans should pick up arms. So he's one of America's more prolific revolutionary writers. And this little manual is a great copy, a great example of that, where he talks about defensive war. In that term, he outlines the reason why men of a free society may be called upon to defend it. And it's not war of conquest, it's not war of greed or avarice, it's a defensive principle. It's a defense of the weak, it's a defense of people who need something, who need defensive measures. And also, you can kind of see where his work presages national events that are occurring in the early republic. Here's an extract from Article 1 of Section 80 that talks about the drill of the Delaware of American militia and the authorities that are given them. And then here's the Act 1793. The language is exactly what Dickinson used. He's the only one writing it. And during the Constitutional Convention, he just happens to be on the militia committee that's setting down how the American militia will be used and organized in the early republic. And this language that he's, using the authority for training will be that set by Congress is exactly what he did in 1782 by taking the drill of the Continental Army and applying it to his men in the Maryland militia. So it's really interesting to kind of see Dickinson's state influence, but also his wider national. And it also challenges us. It challenges us in two areas. It revises our view of the American militia. That has undergone a significant change over in the recent years from, one of the stalwart farmers and shopkeepers to sort of stumble bum, kind of can't get out of its own way kind of thing, to now something that's a much more nuanced kind of understanding of militia played an important role. But it was one that was different than what we expect, but one that had a significant effect on things like small unit operations, foraging, supplies, things like that. But Dickinson's writing also challenges us to think differently as well. By language, it really is a way of challenging us to think about, to revise our thinking on how we see the Second Amendment. And because a lot of what he says is really counter to the way the language being used today. So lastly, as you guys prepare yourselves and your classes for the 250th, I would like for you to kind of think back to the revolutionary generation. I think they're kind of reaching out to us today to think in terms of what does this American Revolution thing mean? And not to see the revolution as an event that happened 250 years ago and there it is. But this is an ongoing process. And you can kind of see that in Benjamin Rush's writing. I love the way he framed this quote. It's written right at the end of the war. It says, the American War is over. But this is far from being the case for the American Revolution. On the contrary, nothing but the first act of the great drama is closed. So to him, the American Revolution is a process. And as we move into the 250, I'm hoping that you guys will kind of think about it for yourselves, but also in your various classes, you challenge your students to see how do they fit into the American Revolution. What is their role in making this continue to happen by the same ways that Benjamin Rush was indicating? Thank you very much.
We will build on our background knowledge of the American Revolution from Mr. Fithian by exploring how to research the era a little bit more deeply and focusing on resources that are available at the Delaware Historical Society and the Delaware Public Archives. So I'm going to introduce both of your speakers now. Rebecca Fay is the Director of Education for the Delaware Historical Society, working closely with the Historical Society's archives and collections to help educators enrich their curriculum utilizing primary sources. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in History and Social Studies Education and a Master of Science in Instructional Technology and Library Information Science. Then to my left, we have Joe Sullivan, who is the Welcome Center Supervisor and a Reference Archivist with the Public Services team here at the Delaware Public Archives. He holds a Bachelor's in History and Political Science from Bridgewater College, and in addition to his role at the Archives, Joe serves as support staff for the Delaware Heritage Commission. In 2023, he was awarded the Council of State Archivists Rising Star Award. Mr. Sullivan has also worked on a variety of programs for the Delaware Public Archives, including topics such as the use of pauper and almshouse records for genealogy and Delaware's role in the Revolutionary War. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone. Thanks for having me. I just want to start by thanking the Delaware Public Archives and First State Heritage Park for partnering with us and for allowing me to come down and talk about the Delaware Historical Society's resources, our primary sources, as well as our educator resources. All right. So what we're going to talk about today is history that you can use in your classroom. So the Delaware Historical Society is a statewide nonprofit promoting, exploring, preserving, and sharing Delaware history to educate, inspire, and empower people and communities. We have 9 historic buildings, including the Delaware History Museum and Mitchell Center for African American Heritage, our research library, both on our Wilmington campus, and the George Reed II House and Gardens in historic Newcastle. Unfortunately, we don't have 56 million collections, but we do have 3 million collections. But our collections really speak to everyday people. So we do have a large collection of Caesar Rodney papers, but the majority of our collections speak to the people like you and me hanging out, living in Delaware, living our lives, which makes our collections very, very special. So I wanted to let you know about what you can find in the Delaware History Museum. In the Delaware History Museum, we have a core exhibition called Discover Delaware. There is a section on the Revolutionary War in that exhibit. Delaware is really a microcosm for the larger things that are happening in the country, and you can really see that when you explore that exhibition. This tour would be self-guided with museum ambassadors available to answer questions and point things out. We only book this tour for 8th grade and older, and you can ask me about curated field trip experiences if you're interested. So we also have the Mitchell Center for African American Heritage downtown in Wilmington, and the core exhibition Journey to Freedom. Journey to Freedom is a chronological look at the African American experience here in Delaware. This is also for 8th grade and up. The tours are actually guided tours with our museum ambassadors. And then we have the George Reed II House and Gardens in historic Newcastle. That really focuses on unseen labor that enabled extravagant lifestyles, preservation of American values through aesthetics, and you can explore the Reed House and use primary sources like architecture, artifacts, and documents to draw conclusions about daily life, the budding new nation, and what we include and leave out of our histories. And these would be ambassador-guided tours and field trips. We also have a research library and archives that includes a lot, I kind of mentioned, a lot of unique manuscript materials, including letters, diaries, family papers, businesses, and organizational records. Over 500,000 images, including rare and early photographs, postcards, prints, and drawings. Delaware newspapers dating back to the 1780s, hundreds of maps and atlases, deeds from the 17th century to the present. We have a growing collection of African Americana, and you can ask me about curated field trip experiences for teachers and students to the research library. So I'm not going to go over all of my slides today. I have to keep my time limited. Joe's going to be my timekeeper here, so he's probably going to yank me off in a few minutes. But I think it's really important that we utilize archival material available here at the Delaware Public Archives related specifically to Delaware, also at the Delaware Historical Society, because using primary sources related to local history can support a deeper understanding of historical topics under study. It enhances critical thinking and more engaging learning experience for the students. I think it's really cool when you can talk to your students about an event that happened right there in their neighborhood. I think it really engages your students in that topic. Also, I just wanted to let you know that I will be providing a QR code at the end of this if you want to a copy of my slide. So how can you access our primary sources? So accessing our primary sources is all through our website, dehistory.org. You can access our digital collections at digital.dehistory.org. I'm not going to talk about those today. It's fairly easy. You go to the website, you plug in a search term, and they pop up. I do want to talk a little bit about accessing primary sources from our archives and our library, because it's not as simple. So when you go to the link to look at collections, you'll come up with, this will actually be a blank page, and you'll see that search bar up top. So I plugged in Caesar Rodney, just so you can see a little bit about what we have in our collections. So these are the results that came up. There's actually 6 pages or more of results. This is just the first page. It highlights exactly what you're looking for, your search term, and then you can scroll down and click on one of these different things, and then it will take you into that collection and will tell you what's available in that collection. So I do need to say that digital collections, we only have about 3,000 pieces digitized right now. So not everything you find in our archives will be digitized, okay? However, I suggest reaching out to me because I use a lot of our primary sources and I might actually have it already digitized what you're looking for. Just as you can see right here, we have Caesar Rodney letters. There's like 4 or 5 boxes of letters to and from Caesar Rodney, if anybody's interested in that. So I just wanted to highlight that for you. So our library catalog is a little bit different. When you click on search our library catalog, you're looking at books, rare books, serials, newspapers, pamphlets, and maps. So I plugged in American Revolution, and these were the results I got. So you really want to look to the highlighted results. And I just want to point out very quickly, anything when you're in this collection searching, anything that starts with an F is going to be an actual book. So you have to come into our archives to see that. Actually, anything you find on here, you'd have to come into our archives to see that, unless I already have it digitized. So anything else, anything starting with PAM is going to be a pamphlet. Anything starting with SER is a serial, like a magazine. So pamphlets, this was the bottom one, British Maps of the American Revolution and a Guide to an Exhibit, published in 1936. So sort of a primary resource, but maybe not really a primary resource, kind of falls in between, but it could be helpful. So any questions about that, about searching our archives? No? Okay, great. All right, so just some tips when you're searching our archives. Talk to us as early as possible. If you're looking for something very specific, please email us, give us a call. Make sure you identify yourself as an educator because they will kind of move you to the top of the line. So make sure your search topics are not too broad. I know American Revolution was really broad, and make sure that they're not too specific. You want to be flexible and creative with your word choices. So if I was thinking about the civil rights movement, I'm not going to just plug in civil rights, right? I'm going to need to know a little bit more about the civil rights movement in Delaware to plug in some of those search terms. Don't just focus on one of our search portals. You'll find that in our digital collections, you might not have a description of the document in there. You might have to go to our archival collections catalog to find the description of what that document actually is. If you don't find something in our online catalogs, just let us know. It just means you're probably going to have to come in and visit it in person. Coming up, we do have a Revolutionary War resource guide coming soon. It's not quite ready. It's going to be a downloadable resource, and it's going to detail the primary and secondary sources on the Revolutionary War in Delaware, available from DHS. Okay, cool. All right, so how else can we help you? So we have a whole bunch of educator resources available for K-12. We do field trips, primary source packets, enrichment packets. We have a copy of our revised Revolutionary War packet in the back room behind me. We do lesson plans. We have short 10-minute videos that are suitable for playing in your classroom. We have recorded teacher workshops, so previous workshops, access to our digital collections, which I already shared with you. Delaware History Day. Anybody heard of National History Day in Delaware? Awesome. Primary source sets are coming soon, so we're very excited about that new project. And traveling trunks are coming soon. So we brought with us today for our tabling session a small sampling of what you'll find in one of our 2 traveling trunks. So we have a traveling trunk for 4th grade on the Revolutionary War in Delaware, and a traveling trunk for 8th grade on the Civil War in Delaware. And some of the artifacts are back there, but one thing that I want you to definitely check out is the whole booklet. With primary sources, suggested activities, background information, anything you could hopefully possibly need for the American Revolution in Delaware. Also, again, I'll repeat this one more time. Ask me about curated field trip experiences. We're here to help. We might not have what you're looking for, but we might be able to do it for you. So this is just a quick glance, and the only thing I'm going to point out is that one of our on-site field trips relates to the Revolutionary War. It's called Choosing Independence and Fighting for Freedom. We're offering that field trip for $2.50, $2.50, get it? $2.50 for this upcoming school year, so 25-26 and 26-27. We're launching 2 new outreach programs, so that means we will bring them to your school. One is Revolutionary Espionage, and one is Congressional Chaos. Both of those could probably be modified for older students, but the on-site field trip is really just for 4th grade. And even though this is not related to the Civil War, I have a captive audience, so or American Revolution, I have a captive audience, so coming soon, we have 2 new virtual field trips for high school. They're going to be launching this fall. One is on the Civil Rights Movement in Delaware, specific topics. And then the other one is Delawareans in World War I. All right. Primary source packets, I already mentioned. We have the revised version of our Choosing Independence, Fighting for Freedom primary source packet in the room behind me. Lesson plans, the traveling trunks I mentioned, primary source sets, National History Day. So, has anybody here ever done National History Day? Awesome. Anybody interested in doing National History Day? Not as many hands. Okay. We have, on the table in the back, we have a teacher starter pack. We only have one with us today, and we're giving it away for free. So the first person, if anybody wants it, we're giving them all away for free, but today, the first person that goes to Garrett, can you stand up? Garrett's the coordinator for National History Day in Delaware, or Delaware History Day as we're calling it now. So Garrett, if you can answer this question, don't shout it out. You have to be the first person to come to Garrett when all of this is finished today. And let me know when the signing of the Declaration started, the exact date. Declaration of Independence, all right? You'll get a free teacher starter pack. All right. So I won't take questions because I probably have to turn it over to Joe, but I'm going to be here all day. If you have any questions, just let me know. Very quickly, who to contact. So for educator workshops, resources, support, curated field trip experiences, you can contact me. For field trips, on-site and outreach, National History Day in Delaware, you can contact Garrett, who already stood up. For the virtual field trips I mentioned that are launching in October, you can contact Sierra, who is our lead ambassador. Do you want to stand up? If you have any questions, she can answer them. For the research library, there's an email, research@dehistory.org. And for the Reed House and Gardens field trips and tours, you can contact Rachel Sheffield. Rachel, would you like to stand up? And we'll all be here for the rest of the day if you have any questions. And here's a QR code to this slide deck. Thank you.
I'll just give everyone a moment with the QR code in case you want to hear. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I am Joe. I'm one of the supervisors here at Public Services at the Archives. I want to start by thanking everyone for coming out and joining us today. I'm sure all of you are very busy. My wife is a middle school teacher, and if you're anything like she is right now, you have a whole lot on your plate and not enough caffeine with which to accomplish it all. So we appreciate you coming to spend your time with us today. So here at the Delaware Public Archives, one of our roles, we are the stewards of Delaware's historic records, all these primary sources dating back through the centuries of Delaware's history. And one of the most important things to us is accessibility. That stewardship doesn't mean anything if the people of Delaware can't access that information and derive value from it. And as educators, you are some of our favorite people. We love nothing more than to support you, give you everything we can to help you in your mission to take that history and spread it throughout our students. So today we're going to go over some of the resources that we offer all of you here at the Delaware Public Archives. Everything here is accessible to any educator, anyone that needs it. If it's anything specific you need, feel free to let us know. And all of this, very importantly, is completely free of charge to you and your schools. So the first thing we're going to be taking a look at, we have an educator resources page on our website. I'll be bringing that up for everyone to see. So here we have everything in one place, kind of all of our general resources for educators, and we'll be updating this and adding to it over time. So just to highlight a few of the things we have here, if I can find the cursor. So we have resource pages for subject guides. The most recently added ones, we have a page for Black history materials and Jewish history materials. So if you're interested in any research guides, we'll have them posted there. We'll have assessments, activities, student videos, various kind of materials we put together for lesson plans, exit tickets, anything like that, already kind of pre-prepared and ready to use, as well as pre-prepared lesson plans for a variety of grade levels. So anything that you were looking for, you can come to this page, open up the tab, we will have lesson plans listed here. Again, we're going to add to this over time. Everything is there ready to download from the plan itself, additional materials, scan primary sources, any materials that you need. All this is freely available through this page on our website. Now, in addition to these more general materials, we have also developed, on the cursor again, a page specifically for DE 250 resources. So this is something that we prepared for the upcoming anniversary to help teachers along with this commemoration, to kind of put our resources related to the American Revolution all in one place, to expand it, make it accessible. And that's all been added to the website. So much like our educators page, it's kind of everything all in one place that you can need. So our first tab here, we have our research guides available. So we have developed a full comprehensive materials guide for the Revolutionary War here at the Archives. This is a list of all of the items and collections that we have in our holdings related to the Revolutionary War, as well as kind of an overview of the history of Delaware and the Revolution, and any of the materials that you could need to kind of navigate our collections looking for these resources. This can be obtained as a hard copy here at the Archives. We have them available today. They can also be downloaded as a PDF from our website. Next up, we have highlighted collections. So these are, and we'll be adding to this over time as we kind of digitize more of these collections for the commemoration. These are all collections of primary sources from the American Revolution. They're being fully digitized, finding aids are being created for them, and all of these are being posted on our website where they can be accessed, downloaded, and used freely and easily. So if anyone needs primary sources for their classrooms for teaching the subject, all that can be accessed very easily through our guide here. Next up, we have an ebook collection. So we have a variety of downloadable ebooks available. Look at a variety of subjects from the Delaware Military Archives, which is a published and transcribed collection of primary sources throughout Delaware's military history, both from before the Revolution, the French and Indian War and such, as well as during the Revolutionary War, as well as after. So any of that information is available. The index for that archive is in volume 3. So if you're looking for specific individuals, events, or key terms, you can check the index there, and that'll provide you with all the information for the 5 volumes. We have a variety of other titles covering Delaware's history, notable figures like Caesar Rodney or Allen McLean, volumes of laws of Delaware. And again, we'll be adding to this as more things become available. Next down, we have lesson plans. So we have specifically worked with some of the teachers who have come in here to develop new lesson plans for the 250th about Delaware and the Revolutionary War, and all these are being posted and added here. These are now fully available to download. We have a few existing ones, but most of these are brand new and available to teachers for the first time. All of these are using primary sources from our holdings here at the Public Archives that these teachers are going through. We have them here today, you'll hear from them later. We're on creating these lesson plans covering topics such as loyalism in Delaware, Delaware and the Revolution, kind of political climate in Delaware, finding the views of the Enlightenment in the documents from this period, a huge number of subjects, as well as some additional ones that fall outside of the traditional DE 250 framework. So all of that is going to be available here to download freely and easily. We're also going to be putting out blog posts here, highlighting records, historical figures, and collections here at the Public Archives related to 250th. The most recent one we've uploaded is highlighting Dickinson's training manuals that Mr. Fithian mentioned earlier. We'll be uploading these regularly, highlighting interesting collections, and these can be a great place to get ideas for different activities or resources to highlight. At the bottom of the resources page, we have our events. We have been out in force at local gathering places, public libraries with historical educational presentations. So if you're interested in going out there, finding out more about some of these subjects, or inviting your students to come and attend, feel free. The tavern talks might not be great for your students, but if you would like any liquid refreshment during the enrichment, we encourage you to come and join us. Now, in addition to our online resources, we also offer a variety of in-person services. So we have hosted quite a large number at this point of professional development days for teachers here in the research room. So if you or your department would like to come in here, you can send us an email with what topics you're interested in, what you're trying to teach, what kind of things you're looking for, and we will go through our collections ourselves, find collections, boxes, items, and we will pull everything out for you, take care of everything for you. And then when you come in, all of these resources will be made available. Archivists will be on hand to answer questions. If you find any documents or resources that you want to have scanned to use in the classroom, we will take care of all of that for you. And again, this is free of charge to you and to your schools. We are happy to take care of any of your needs in that regard. We've also hosted student workshops. If you're interested in planning a field trip to the archives, we will do a similar thing. If you provide us with a subject or a concept, we can pull everything out for you. We've had, most recently we did a World War II workshop. We pulled out resources related to Delaware in the Second World War. Students were able to go station to station, examine different types of records. They had a worksheet where they would write down what the records were, what they meant, things like that. So anything that you'd like to accomplish, whether it's research skills, looking at different types of sources, if there's a particular subject we were happy to accommodate, we will go through our collections, find everything you will need, and have everything ready for you. We also offer student tours and activities. In addition to coming in to visit the Delaware Public Archives, we also work with First State Heritage Park, some of the other sites here in the area. So if you're interested in rotating through multiple sites, if you want to visit the archives as well as the old State House, John Bell House, and we can plan kind of a rotating field trip. Some of the activities that we offer here in the research room for students, we have a records intake activity, which students are tasked with kind of organizing and coordinating the intake and storage of records, using kind of sample records and boxes and content lists, so they can see how the archives as a state agency has to manage government records and keep them organized. We have a card catalog activity, which has been, I think, the most popular, where students actually use an old school card catalog to conduct research, to find references to historical documents, and then locate them either as paper records in archival boxes or on microfilm. They particularly like the microscope over here, so if you can crank their way through the film, the students have been pretty entertained by it. We also have a hands-on disaster recovery activity, which not real sample records are dumped in water, and students are taught about how different types of materials react to those conditions, how we would go about saving them, trying to preserve the information. I mean, you know it's good when you ask the students, who wants to destroy something, and all their hands shoot up, so this is quite popular. Additionally, a brand new interactive for students that we have developed, that we are unveiling today, is our very own DPA board game, Road to Liberty. This is developed by members of our staff. The game takes consistently about 9 or 10 minutes. It can accommodate up to 5 players. And all of the locations on the board, the different cards that you interact with, are all based around historic Delaware locations in the Revolution, events. All the cards are based on documents that came out of our collections, based on people's experiences here during the war, the different types of things that they would have had to deal with, or the contributions that they made. We can see some of the most important staff to the development of this game here. So on the left is reference archivist Maria Meyer, who was essential in sourcing documents that were being used and for designing the function of the game. Mr. Dave Chambers on the right, who's part of our excellent marketing and exhibits team, who without whom we wouldn't have developed the wonderful board and gotten everything finished and presentable. And then the big doofus in the middle was me. So we were having that at our table this afternoon, so if you'd like to play a sample game, everything is in there and available. We'll be offering that here on site as a student activity, and we were thinking about kind of expanding that in the future. So we invite you to try it out if you're interested. So next up, some of the educational programs that we offer. So the first Saturday every month, we have First Saturday programs here at the archives. These are presented by either archive staff or by researchers who work with us presenting educational programs based on the materials here at the archives, based on Delaware history. They've been quite popular. The next one coming will be on Saturday, September 6th, where Research Room Supervisor Dana Niemeyer will be presenting a program on the Delaware Educational Television Network and the state's attempt to create its own educational programming for students and teachers in the 1960s. These have also been offered in the past as extra credit opportunities. Teachers that we've worked with have made this available to students that they can attend for extra credit. In our March presentation, coinciding with Women's History Month, we had a whopping 26 high schoolers from Dover High School come to join us for extra credit. And if you can get 26 teenagers out of bed at 10:30 on Saturday morning, I think that's something special. So we encourage you to come visit us for those. As we got a sneak peek at earlier, one of our more recent 250 initiatives is Tavern Talks. This is a series of programs that we put together about Delaware and the Revolutionary War, and we are specifically going out to local breweries and drinking establishments and kind of making this accessible to the public in a more fun, kind of casual environment. So while these are primarily being displayed at these, local, very adult-only establishments, we can offer these as educational programs for teachers. We can come to your school, present them in person, we can offer them here on site if you'd like them, or we can come in virtually through Zoom or Teams and present them to your class that way. So if you're interested in any of the content, we're happy to provide. So the first three Tavern Talks we have prepared, we have In Common Cause, which is a presentation on Delaware's home front in the Revolutionary War, what was going on here in the state throughout the war, how its people were affected, how they contributed to the war effort, as well as some of the threats and the challenges that Delaware faced throughout that conflict. We have Flags of Our Forefathers, which is a genealogy presentation talking about historic records in Delaware, how you can trace your family history back to the Revolutionary era, and then how you can use those records to prove patriotic service on behalf of your ancestors, whether they're fighting in the military or serving in civilian capacity. We have Lock, Stock, and Barrel, which highlights the weapons, ammunition, and tactics of the American Revolution, how the conflict was fought, and highlights some specific engagements that Delaware was a part of, and showing how this kind of 18th century warfare affected their experience. We have two new talks that are being developed now. We're excited to preview. We have Not Today, PA, which is a program on Separation Day and Delaware Day. Delaware's kind of journey from a part of another colony into statehood, and how the state has celebrated and commemorated those achievements over time. We also have Independence or the Bayonet, which is a profile on Delaware's signers of the Declaration of Independence. So we'll be excited to offer those to you relatively soon. Now, we have vast collections here at the Public Archives, millions of documents and photographs. And while not all of them are accessible at the click of a button, we do the best that we can. And so the first resource I'd like to show you all is our content management system. This is the DPA portal. This is what you can use on our website to navigate the contents of our collections. So bring this up here. So this is the system here. You can use this to search through, essentially defining for all of our collections. It's not necessarily digitized records, but it will help you see what we have and what's accessible. Now, I won't get into too much depth because on our website, on our searching collections page, we have a full video tutorial and guide to how this system works and how you can use it. But I would like to showcase the advanced search features so you can see how this works. We have a variety of fields here, dates, names, titles, keywords, things like that, as well as some of the nitty-gritty records classification systems like record group numbers, things like that. And the tutorials will explain how all of that works. I would like to show you one thing here in record type. The option here is series. So series, this will bring up what we call series descriptions. These are descriptions for groups of records that describe what they contain, what years they cover, what the scope of the collection is. Looking at series descriptions kind of helps understand what we have, how much of it we have, and kind of what it covers. So this is a useful way to get to grips with what exactly our collections can contain. So for example, I'll plug in a record group here, say 8005, that's for the Department of Public Instruction and the Department of Education. Plug that in, hit search, and that will bring up all the series descriptions for the different constituent collections in that record group. So you can see here, we click on one here, we have a scrapbook collection, open that up, and we can see here a description of everything that collection contains, how many boxes it consists of, the years that it covers, and all of that. So while that helps you navigate what is in our collections, we do have digital archives. We do have materials that are already scanned, ready to go, and downloaded from our websites. Those are hosted through a service called Content PM. You can choose what that looks like. So here we have our digital archives. So you can use this to search the many collections that we have scanned. Now, in addition to what is already available, If you find something in the portal, find any kind of records that you're interested in that isn't already scanned and available, if you email us and let us know, we can get it scanned and prepared for you. So anything you're looking for, please feel free to reach out to us. But this is everything that's already ready to go. So we can have an example here. We'll go to the search bar. Let's say Caesar Rodney, for example. Now, if you're putting in a phrase, I recommend using quotation marks. That way it just keeps it together. We will enter here. Here we can see a variety of items coming up from photographs, images, documents, legislative papers, anything containing his name, all of that coming up to download at the click of a button. So if anyone would like to reach out to us here and take part in any of these services, we are open here in the Maplewood Ridgely Research Room, 9 to 4, Monday through Friday. Appointments are not required, but they're strongly recommended if you wanted to come in on your own time to look for anything, or if you'd like to schedule anything, please feel free to reach out to us. We have our contact information available on our sheets here. You can reach us by phone or by email here in the research rooms. Anything that you need at all, if you're looking for materials for your classroom, if you'd like to set up a day for professional development, field trip, anything you need, we are available at the click of a button. So thank you very much for coming out today.
Thank you so much, Rebecca and Joe, for those wonderful presentations about the resources that your institutions offer. So now that we have seen how to find resources on the American Revolution, I'm so sorry, I'm doing it on the computer, not even meaning to. We're going to shift gears a little bit to the classroom. So in this session, you'll hear from two experienced educators, T.H. Leighty and Emily Green, who will share how they bring these materials, like Delaware Historical Society and Archivist have shown you, to life through lesson plans and strategies that you can use with your own students. And I'm going to go ahead and do their bios as well at the same time. T.H. Leighty is the Social Studies Department Chair at Dover High School, where he has taught since 2001. He leads instruction in Advanced Placement U.S. History, along with courses on the Civil War and World War II. He holds degrees from Washington College and Wilmington College, and is currently pursuing a Master of Arts in American History through Gettysburg College and the Gilder Lehrman Institute. Emily Green is a Dover native and social studies teacher at Polytech High School. She earned her bachelor's degree from Westchester University of Pennsylvania and her master's degree from Pace University. Please welcome them now.
Okay, so welcome. So we're here to talk to you about utilizing the lesson plans.
So it's not just using the lesson plans on the website, at least in my opinion. It's also, like, if you're going to set up a day for your department or your grade level or what have you to come in and look at the different documents, you know, what are you looking to do? What are you trying to accomplish, and how can you put those documents together? And one of the things that I know that when I started putting some of these lessons together, and I'm going to give you one that I put together not too long ago from a document from the archives, it's kind of about literacy, at least partially anyway. I know Dover High is focusing on literacy this year. They want to do a lot of reading and that kind of thing. So we want those kids to be able to break these documents down, look at them kind of the correct way, look at the dates, the authors, that kind of thing. And that's what you'll see a lot of the lessons that I have, that I've done, focused on. It also is a great way to introduce some Delaware history. We take these topics, the Revolutionary War, which traditionally in the past has been this huge, broad topic. Well, now we can bring it into the kids' realm right here in Delaware. Hey, look at what happened right where you're living, and this is an excellent way to do that. And then, as Emily reminded me the other day, national history is local history. It all was happening right here in Delaware, and this is a great way to go about doing that.
So in regards to the national history being local, we also just want to remind you that you don't have to have something specific about Delaware. It can be a national topic, and then you can find the Delaware sources that go with it. And it's really impactful for the students because it helps them to develop the sense of place and where they are, and understanding where they're coming from, the communities that they're going to go and operate in. They need to know that, but they also need to know that Delaware is a part of that national story as well. So when we're using the archives, Sid already kind of gone over a lot of this. So there's the pre-made lessons website, the primary sources that you can turn into lessons. They're wonderful at setting up PD and primary source workshops for students and for staff. They have the content knowledge tavern talks and first Saturdays, and then outreach to schools through those guest lecture programs. But since they've already talked about that, we won't rehash that with you.
So, Dover High's come to the archives on a couple of occasions, and we have, given them topics ahead of time that we wanted to kind of get some local flavor for and to, enhance our lessons. And this is, us here looking through the documents, trying to figure out how best to use these in the classroom. Again, one of the things that I know I focused on is the literacy aspect, but also the next one. One more. I thought I had that. Oh, sorry. I teach AP US history, so one of the things that I like to do is teach the kids how to break down documents, and I use something called HAPPY, where we look at the historical context, the audience, the purpose, the point of view, and then why. And I try to take those documents that I found at the archives and use those to, again, enhance what we're talking about in class, but also get the kids to break down these documents so that they're able to see that it's not necessarily, why are we looking at these documents? There's, why did they write these documents? What's the importance of these documents, especially in the grand scheme of the American Revolution, for example? The example on the right there is actually one of the lessons on the website, and we'll kind of go to those in just a few minutes and kind of highlight them so you can see what we're doing.
Polytech also went and did an and I actually was bad and I deleted the photos off my phone, and then I used the Microsoft search feature in email, and if you're familiar with that, it obviously didn't turn up what I was looking for it, right? But they're wonderful. We actually utilized it to get stuff for House Bill 198, and so that was also a really nice way to supplement things that we already had, make sure that we were in compliance with things, and then again, bringing that back to students in a local way so they understand the communities that they're coming from. So there is a lot of good content. Actually, Mr. Leighty, this one's yours, so it's okay if I switch to the next one. I'm sorry. Also, Mr. Leighty, so TH. Mr. Leighty was my high school teacher. So I just have to call him Mr. Leighty, and I can't call him anything but Mr. Leighty. So we'll do tips for using part 2 since that's me and he's passing out his work there. So one of the things when you're looking at using some of the resources is it can be a little bit intimidating to maybe do a full-blown lesson plan the first time that you're doing something. But don't let that intimidate you or deter you from using them, because they really also lend themselves really well for warm-ups, exit tickets, just quick little things. Even posting a picture on a slide, asking the students to break that down. Anything that you're doing to get those primary sources from Delaware in the classroom is going to have a positive impact on students. And it's also a really good place there to try to do a lot of the civics and econ standards and to incorporate them directly into a history class. So because so many of the resources from the archives are state resources, they tend to lend themselves more to things that the government's doing, so on and so forth. Another good tip would be letters. So when I started actually working with the archives, some of the easiest primary sources that I found to incorporate into my classroom were letters from people in Delaware. So I started out actually with the busing and the issues in regards to busing up in Newcastle County, and there were lots and lots and lots and lots of letters from people all over the state in regards to their opinions on busing. And so it was really good because you get to see, and the students get to see what different people's ideas were, what the mindset's going on during that time period. And it also lends itself really well to the history standard in regards to point of view, because you can then, they also will tell you things about themselves in them, or sometimes, for example, it'll be like writing from a church, right? And so then you can get that perspective in there as well. Another tip is current is easier, and honestly a large part of that is because of the typing versus like the handwritten aspect of things, and there tend to be just more sources, and I just always felt a little bit more comfortable touching the newer stuff than the older stuff too, just to be very honest with you about it. It's also really good for DESA prep or other test prep. So actually some of those formative assessments that were on the website that they showed you were designed to specifically bring preparation for the state social studies test. And so that's a good place again to incorporate something without having to be a full-blown lesson plan. So for example, there's one about working on a commission and the importance of that as a responsibility for a citizen. And so it's a good way that you could say, okay, I'm talking about this history topic, here's a Delaware history thing, and it links to this civic standard in there specifically. Another tip would be the snipping tool. So Mr. Leighty was going to tell you about using a scanner in order to get the documents. But once you have them on your phone and you've emailed them to yourself, I'm sure we're all very familiar with the snipping tool on the computer, but that's an excellent way to take a primary source and make it so that you can put it on a PowerPoint, you can get it into the students' hands, you can use it in a variety of ways. It just makes it, it's just a shortcut kind of to make things easier. And then my other final tip would be to transcribe cursive for your students. They cannot read the cursive handwriting, and so it's something that's you don't want kind of that to be an issue when we're really trying to focus on like the literacy aspect of it. So I like to actually try to give them the actual primary source, right, and then a transcription of that primary source as well. So they still get to see the actual source that they're looking at. And so I actually put a picture of one here. So this is actually a, basically they're trying to get donations for the citizens of Boston after the Boston Tea Party and the Port Bill closed the Boston port. And so these are actually all of the people from Delaware who gave money to support the citizens of Boston through a subscription, basically. But if you look at it, well, what does that source say, right? And so if you were to drop that in front of your kids, right, it might be something that would be a little bit intimidating. And so I actually, using the snipping tool, and actually my student back here, Justin was my teacher intern. Hi, Justin. Stand up, Justin. I got embarrassed a little bit. So it's like a full teacher moment, right? I've got like my history teacher, and then that's my student, and all of it, right? Like, yeah. So he actually worked with me to develop this into a warm-up for students. And so when we demoed it in class, this is one where it's even typed, but the S's and the F's, right, from the old stuff, they were like, I don't know what that, I like instantly like shut down kind of about it. I also didn't take a great scan of it, it was a little bit my fault, but I shortened it so that we could fit it on there and do those debriefing questions with them. But just doing some of those kind of things to make it so that the sources are more accessible to the students is something that's helpful.
So when we first, Dover High first came to the archives, we gave them certain topics, obviously, and you know, I know this is DE 250 and, you know, the American Revolution, but you can do this for a variety of different topics that you teach in your schools. You know, the Revolution, World War II, slavery, Jim Crow. You can even jump into political science, geography. There are maps here. There are election results. There's just there's a plethora of information here. So it's not just history that you're able to use the archives for. But as we were going through some of the documents and taking a look at them, and it was like, oh, we want to try and use this document or that document. It was, well, how do we, outside of taking it and using it, you know, scanning. And there is on your iPhone, if you have an iPhone, the notes section of your app has a scan feature that works really pretty well. It was much better than trying to take a photo of the document and then sending it to myself. So we just used that, or I used that, scanned it and sent it to myself. The document or the lesson plan I just handed out to you is kind of an example of what Emily was talking about a minute ago. Is you don't have to turn these into full-blown, multi-day lessons. This was one I created. It's a document from Delaware just after the Declaration of Independence was signed about forming a new government. This one was actually relatively easy to read. Outside of telling the kids that, you know, the F's are actually S's. They should be able to read it, but I agree with Emily wholeheartedly. You got to transcribe the documents or they are going to have a conniption. They're not able to read them, and I've never read cursive, I've never written cursive, and so they have a terrible time with it. But again, and kind of go to what Chuck Fithian was talking about earlier. I told him a few minutes ago that I hated his guts now. Basically because he inspired all these different lesson plan ideas while I was sitting there and I started taking these notes. And the document, I know one of the questions my kids always have when you're telling them about something in history is, well, how do you know? How do they know that? Well, his talk a few minutes ago is a wonderful example of this is how we know. Most of us think about primary documents, you think about letters and diaries and photographs, and that stuff is wonderful and it works great, but he mentioned ration receipts that they're looking at, muster rolls, pension records, return of supplies, weather records, pay receipts, inoculation records, all of these things. And maybe you're not showing your students these things, but you're at least telling them this is how they're going about finding out that information. And I think that it lends itself in my mind to a great lesson plan that I need to talk to Dawn and Joe about maybe a little later. One of the other things I see with teaching history is you're a detective. You're trying to piece all this information together and coming up with a lesson where maybe you piece together a guy from the Revolutionary War based on some of these documents. You don't tell the student who it is. Maybe we already know. But they have to piece it together from all the different documents and figure it out themselves. So they kind of get that this is how a historian works kind of idea.
You go back to the one.
I have copies of the documents here if you like to take a look at it. But again, to kind of give you an example of other things besides just the American Revolution that you can find and use in your classrooms, the Beulah letters, which led to Brown versus Board of Education. I found those, actually I think Joe or somebody had pulled them out, was all excited, and they're showing me, and I'm like, oh, this is awesome. And started scanning them, and now when I teach civil rights and Brown versus the Board, this is what I start with, is these letters that went back and forth between Beulah and the governor and that kind of thing, and they are incredible. This is an example of the Loyalist one in the middle is an example of one of the lessons I put together, and as Emily said, transcribed it. Maria Myers, who was in one of the photos a little while ago, former student of mine. They're everywhere. They can't go anywhere. Helped me translate this and transcribe it so that students could read it. But yeah, you definitely have to do that. And then the World War II one, great one that I use in my World War II class now to show students that, hey, look, I know World War II is this obviously worldwide event, but it's happening here in Delaware. And these guys are getting right here in Milford, because it's labeled Milford at the top, but right here in Milford, they're getting documents on how to handle an air raid if it happens in our area. You can have the kids take a look at these documents, and again, I have copies of them if you'd like to see those. This is actually the lesson that I handed out to you a few minutes ago. And again, I kind of based it on that happy that I was telling you about a few minutes ago, that historical context, the audience, the purpose, the point of view, and then the why. Those things that you as a historian want to kind of take a look at and, get your students to focus on.
So two of the lessons that I worked on were actually in regards to civic standards and incorporating them into the history classroom. So one I did was the Enlightenment Comes to Delaware, which is obviously not what this one is about, but it's a kind of a scavenger hunt where the students go through and they read actual sources. So it's some of the transcriptions from the Continental Congress, there's some letters, a variety of different things, and they have to identify the different Enlightenment ideas, rights or checks and balances, separation of power that they see at play in them. And it's like a little bit of like a race scavenger hunt for them. This is another one that I did in a similar fashion. One of the themes of America 250 is not just that the revolution ended when it ended, right, in 1783, right, that it's going to continue and that we're working towards achieving those values. And so I designed a lesson in regards to fair housing. And it's actually a lesson that's specifically about forms of civic participation, so it fits with that civic standard, right, about rights and responsibilities and civic participation. And so I took a variety of letters, reports, newspaper articles that I found that all demonstrated different ways that citizens try to make change in their society. I also was able to find examples of different forms of housing discrimination. So restrictive covenants, blockbusting, and redlining that are things that I would discuss at a national level, but I found the examples of them in Delaware from the archives. And so for example, we have a restrictive covenant. So for the neighborhood that's over by TGI Fridays in Silver Lake, if you're from Dover, there's a restrictive covenant for that neighborhood specifically. And so it's really interesting for the students to see that. And when you're like, that's the neighborhood by TGI Fridays, right? They're like, oh my gosh, like this stuff is happening near us. And then there's an article in there about blockbusting and how the governor was working to try to end blockbusting as a practice and some of the things that they were trying to do. So Delaware was trying to get the fair housing legislation passed at the same time, basically, the national legislation was working towards that. And so basically what they do is a scavenger hunt. And I brought this as a lesson, it's a whole thing, and I've got them all laminated and everything so you can see it. But essentially the documents are broken up into different sets. And so different students have different forms of civic participation. So then I have the big posters, as you can see here. So it says like working in a citizens group, peaceful assembly, letter writing, and then sit-ins. And so the students would have different examples of those primary sources. And then they have to race to try to figure out which example of civic participation the citizens are using in that moment to try to achieve more equal and equitable housing in the state of Delaware. And so it was actually really cool and nerdy when I researched it because there's these wonderful pictures of these people participating in a sit-in, right? And there's a march in front of the Capitol building, right? And so when the students see like, oh, you know, these sit-ins, we talk about the Greensboro sit-ins. Well, that's a tactic that people are employing in the state of Delaware in your own community, right? And so it's really powerful. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so I did this as a demo with my class just because honestly the directions for it were kind of complicated and I wanted to make sure that I had them explained sufficiently. And so this is actually what they did and came up with, and they were able to match the documents and everything, and they really enjoyed it, and they got very competitive with each other in regards to like making it a race and a competition, and they got stickers at the end, so obviously they enjoyed that. Yeah, I don't do candy. Yeah.
So just to highlight again, some of the other documents that you can find in the archives, turn into some sort of lesson. So this I found right on the website as I was putting this together, and it's obviously a map from 1688 of Delaware area, the surrounding region. And it's fascinating because, you know, there's no political lines necessarily, or they're not delineated. Well, at least Delaware isn't delineated necessarily. You can see where it's part of Pennsylvania. You can see East and West New Jersey, as it was called at the time. And it gives the students, again, this perspective of how things have evolved over time. Because that's one of the other things that I think as a teacher you're trying to get them to understand is things change over time. And geography changes over time. So if you're teaching, again, something other than history, there are materials here in the archives that you can use for those lessons. You just have to think about it, be creative, but they're here. And again, a lot of the stuff is online and you can just pull off and steal.
And the pictures, and this is another good example of how, you know, don't be intimidated, right, of, oh my gosh, I have to turn this into a whole thing. One of the first ways that actually I even ever used and resourced from the archives was a picture on my slide. And it was actually the restrictive covenant that I mentioned to you. When I went over restrictive covenants, I talked about it, I showed it to them. And I've had that resource for like years, honestly, at this point, and I've been like trying to figure out like what is it I want to do with it, and then I acquired some like letters, right, about fair housing, right, and so we were able to just doing something like putting a picture here. There's also a picture of students in Newcastle County practicing for like duck and cover, basically, and it's one of the warm-ups that's on there, but they're covering themselves up with a sheet in the hallway to protect themselves from nuclear fallout, which is interesting. And so you can see that image there, and then it leads to a lot of questions from the kids, like, what are they doing? That's silly, right? And then you can get your usual bird the turtle video in, right? And duck and cover and all of that. But you can start that discussion off with a picture like that and really get the students thinking like, well, what are they doing? And then you tell them that it's a school that they potentially could have been to, right? Or had friends that attended to, and they get more buy-in.
That's what I like about the finding the Beulah letters, if you haven't done that. And you see these discussions going back and forth between the governor and Yule about the issue with picking the daughter up and so on. I haven't done anything with it really, other than make copies and have the kids read it and go, okay, what's going on? Tell me what's happening here. It's kind of that detective idea that I was talking about a little earlier, just sort of maybe a little easier form than what I'm thinking of with the American Revolution. Thanks again, Chuck. Appreciate it. I'm not going to show this video, but again, they do have videos in the archives that you can also get copies of. This is one of the ones that I asked about and shown at least a brief clip of in class when we talk about World War II in the home front. We can bring it home to Delaware here, and this is right from our area, you know, chickens been to war, you know, so works out very well. Oh, that's it, we don't need to hear that. The lesson plans. So there are lesson plans here. There are ones that we've done, like Loyalist in Delaware is one that I've put together. Again, for the 250. All of the documents are from the archives. They're wonderful. Again, we tried to transcribe those that were hard to read. There are also the older ones that are still here that I know I've used in the past. There's one on the Olympic Post, which again you can use at a political science or a criminal justice class that have been wonderful. They actually have the actual document or the scanned version of the document so the kid can see that, but then again the transcription is there as well. And there are ones for all grade levels. I even tried to put one together. My wife teaches second grade, and so I tried to put one together that she could do with her kids using the historical markers that you can find around the state and kind of tracing the American Revolution by just going to these markers throughout the state of Delaware. One other quick note, I know Rebecca Fay was talking about the Delaware Historical Society. We've been there as Social Studies Department at Dover High, wonderful as well. We're going to go back again in October for another PD day. So I highly recommend using these resources. They're right here at your fingertips. You know, don't hesitate to use them.
And I would say the same thing, basically, so it really does increase engagement for the students, right? If they're looking at these things and realizing that history affects them and is still continuing to affect them today. And there's no better way to do that by exposing them to the fact that this national history is local and that their local history was important to our nation as well. Does anybody have any questions? We're teachers, so we know not to stand between everybody and lunch, right? Yeah.
And as another quick note, Joe's coming in October as well to give his presentation on the home front of the revolution at Dover High. So again, they're not lying when they say they offer all of these things.
Thank you so much, guys. And we are so glad that you do use the resources. As TH was saying earlier, all of our stuff is on YouTube as well. So we have content DM like we talked about. But shameless plug for YouTube as well, and we will continue adding things probably to like playlists that will be topically organized for you guys, so please feel free to check out that as well.